Good morning, everyone. Hope everybody's had a great 2 sessions so far. I'm pleased to start the next segment and here to introduce to Sanjeev Kumar, who you've already met. Sanjeev is the CEO, founder of Whitesight. They produce the most amazing, really, if you haven't used their intelligence, the analysis they provide on FinTech, I strongly suggest you should go and have a look at it. Sanjeev, over to you.
Thanks, Amir. Thanks for the kind introduction. So we have a very exciting set of panelists today to discuss open banking and open finance trends. And we have a mix of data aggregation, innovation infrastructure players, and an open finance third-party provider on the panel. The only one we are probably missing is a representative from bank, but I reckon we can get a view from all the 3 panelists on how the banks are thinking about open banking in the region. So welcome, panelists. I think Alina has just joined. So I'll just give a brief introduction of the panelists, starting with Alina. So we have Alina Beleuta, Growth Officer at Saltage. She is also responsible for global strategic initiatives and business development at the firm. Saltage is an open banking data aggregation platform with a presence in several countries across the globe. And I'm assuming Alina is a part of the expansion strategy to the Middle East region as well. Welcome, Alina.
Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Next, we have Jubran Alshahrani, who is the co-founder of Muddahar. So Muddahar is a leading open finance fintech platform based in Saudi, which enables use cases like savings, investments, budgeting, and more around consumer finances by integrating the bank accounts of the consumer. Welcome, Jubran.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
And finally, we have Abe Karar, Chief Product and Innovation Officer at FinTech Galaxy. What a beautiful name for a fintech firm, I must say. FinTech Galaxy is positioned as an open finance and open innovation platform, which helps banks with open banking compliance mandates, provides the data aggregation layer, and also helps with the customer-facing use cases that banks can build in partnership with TPPs and fintechs. Welcome, Abe.
Thank you for having me.
Perfect. So our topic today is open banking expectations, opportunities, and challenges. So I just wanted to get started with the expectations, right? Probably the easiest of the lot in terms of what we all expect from the regulators, from the banks in the region. So we are seeing a lot of countries going about their open banking journey, and most of that journey is nudged by the regulators, especially in the Middle East region. So I wanted to start with the expectation discussion from 2 angles. One is because regulators are driving the open banking journey in most of the countries in Middle East. What do you think is the expectation of regulators as they go about their business of opening the industry? And the second angle is, what is the expectation of industry players like yourselves? What kind of wish list you have from regulators as key industry stakeholder in the open finance journey? So maybe let's start with Alina, and then we can go around the table.
Thank you. So in comparison to other regions that I'm overviewing, I expect the GCC to have the fastest ride to embracing open banking use cases, especially in e-commerce, low-cost payments, automatizations of lending, PFM, automatization of SMEs services, treasury management. This is what we at Saltage witnessed in Europe in the beginning. Only that the region has the experience of other countries to learn from and has already international banks that are open banking ready, like Standard Chartered recently declared they've made their APIs available in the Saudi market. And it has suppliers like us that already know the typical mistakes to avoid in an open banking journey that will make it less costly and less painful. For example, we are pre-integrated with top core banking systems in the region, like Temenos, Finastra, Mambu, Thought Machine, and we help banks to become compliant with the open banking standard. In terms of the expectations that the TPPs And from the demand side, I see a lot of names that drive demand in GCC, and they drive directly open banking adoptions by the end users, and that would be Beyond Money, Ion Digital, Tarabu, Dapi, Lean, even FinTech, Galaxy. And there is a movement from the regulator, but our expectation and my personal fear is that the one of the inclusion, it should be very easy, let's say, for all kinds of all kinds of segments of TPPs to get a right to get a license, a process that is really working, for example, in Europe, which is very more difficult in Australia, for example, and it's depending on the framework that the regulator will embrace to streamline that. I see traction around the payment because most of the fintechs in MEA region, 85% of them are around payments, remittances, transfers, and so on. So I guess the first use cases will be around that. From the bank side, there is always the challenge to understand what's the benefit from the banks. And they don't really understand it now, but this is something like all of us here on the panel work towards. And it's our mission somehow to explain them what's in it for them in the open banking journey, because we can kind of make this work only if we are together in it. Thanks.
Thanks, Alina. So Jubran, you're doing a lot of things on the consumer side. Why don't you help us understand what you're seeing in the market in terms of Middle East in general, but maybe Saudi in specific? What kind of consumer expectations you are witnessing where open banking has a big role to play?
All right. Well, when we look at open banking, it's a really exciting time here in Saudi Arabia. Everyone's prepping up for it, whether it's the banks, the fintechs, or the regulator. And there has been a lot of movement lately on that side. But I think when, just back to a point that Alina mentioned, it's two different expectations. So the fintechs are more excited. The consumers want that, they want to have that high tech, they want to have that instant gratification services. On the other side, banks are still trying to figure out their strategic position when it comes down to open banking. What does this make sense to them? And between these two, the regulator is kind of in the middle, trying to move the agenda when it comes down to open banking. And this is how we see it. A lot of the fintechs are ready, and we're waiting on banks to provide more APIs, more services. And the banks are still trying to figure out. Some have taken great, steps when it comes down to open banking, but I think more can be done from the bank side. I believe by Q4 we're going to see, a lot of movement in open banking. I believe a draft will be out soon for the regulations of open banking from SAMA, and it'll just be, it's just an exciting time when we look at it here in Saudi Arabia.
Perfect.
Sanjeev, I'd like to add something to that comment. Actually, both to what Alina and Jubran have kindly shared. You asked about the expectation, and in my opinion, I feel that the region has to do things a bit differently. So what we've seen is that regulators will lift and shift a regulatory framework from one country and expect that it's going to work in their country. You'll see Bahrain, they took over the UK standard. Some countries are saying, you know what, we want to do more open finance right through the door. We're just going to take the Australian CDR. And in my mind, one of the expectations is, guys, just slow down and understand your market. Localize your thought process and understand what works and what doesn't work. Another thing which is very interesting is, and it ties to the point I just made, we say open banking is supposed to help financial inclusion, right? But what's interesting is open banking by definition is only based on payment accounts. So you have to have an account in order for you to use open banking or benefit from it. So in my view, right from the beginning, there should be an understanding of, if I wanted to really help with financial inclusion, why don't I standardize the API specifications and bring in wallets? A wallet has a balance and has transactions just like a payment account. But guess what? A lot of the unbanked, they can only get an e-wallet, they cannot get a bank account. So just by one small tweak. Another thing when it comes to expectation, why are some regulators just focusing on retail? Bahrain has been the pioneer. Now we're talking to banks and saying, hey, you want to do treasury management? You want to aggregate your balances? Yeah, of course, that'd be great. That will help our corporates. Guess what? We can't do it because our APIs are not allowing us to expose balances for corporates. But why is that the case? Why was that ring-fenced from the beginning? And it's not just that it wasn't done from the beginning, it wasn't even on the roadmap. Like, it's like, okay, we're open banking ready, we're good to go. So in my mind, expectations should be towards the regulators and others in the region to take a step back, understand your local market, and understand what makes sense to add value. And the bank, their expectation is this whole value creation piece. You know, they're always thinking of this as a checkbox exercise. Well, guys, why don't you from the beginning sit down and understand how do you create value? Some banks who are doing it very well in, you know, in Saudi, I was at Seamless, and you hear BSF, Bank Saudi Fransi. They're like, guys, open banking is table stakes. We're doing BaaS. We have a new revenue stream. It's banking as a service. Let's go. So to me, that's the right mindset, and that should be the expectation that we need to consider and to reflect in our thought process going forward.
Absolutely. Thanks for touching on those points, Abe. I think there's a nice segue to the next section, which is opportunities, right? And you touched upon some of the opportunities that open banking unlocks for the industry. So maybe the first one that we can start with is, you know, the evolution from open banking to open finance and eventually to open data. How do you see that coming across, and what kind of evolution journey seem to be more suitable for countries in the Middle East region? Let's start with Abe, maybe yourself, and then we can go to Jubran
Sure.
and Alina.
It is a natural progression, and you know we hear about it all the time: open banking, open finance, open data, open economy, and you know it sounds great. The question again, it boils down to execution. How do you execute this in a way that makes sense? And in my mind, you know, number one, a phased approach is absolutely required. Number two, this phased approach has to be backed with a very strategic roadmap and milestones, and there has to be a certain level of accountability. Again, I reflect on Bahrain. They did a good job where they set phases to implement certain APIs, even within open banking. But then if they were to continue the journey, and as a matter of fact, they're now thinking, how do we expand it into open finance? And a third point is look at the product set and look at the market and look at the readiness. It doesn't make sense for you to say, oh, we're going open finance, and in the next 2 quarters, we're going to integrate all the insurance companies, when you know that probably insurance companies in a given country have more archaic legacy solutions than the banks themselves. So you're setting yourself up for failure. So understanding the market and product fit is another aspect. And then the last thing I would say is, which ties back to my previous point, is think about the value you're trying to create in the short, medium, and long term. So in my mind, I am advising my clients, my guys, don't do open banking. Don't. Just forget about it. Just leapfrog. Start open finance right away. Why? Because it may take just adding one simple product that actually will expand your value 10 times by just simply adding, you know, cards, or by simply adding, you know, one product which is actually like a mortgage and a loan, secured, unsecured, etc. In essence, the structure of the product is the same, and the rest are semantics. So why don't you put that in your data model up front, and then take small steps to introduce these capabilities? So, and to me, that is one of the most important of all of the considerations that I shared with you, because that's what's going to allow you to help the market see the value. And when they see the value, that's when they start marching to the beat and moving towards that in lockstep. One more thing I'll share, and then I'll pass it over to my colleagues to provide their input, is moving to open data is a natural progression, but I really like what Australia had done when they wrote their CDR. It was from the beginning with that mindset, you know, accounted for. So you look at the regs, and it doesn't just talk about banking or financial products. It talks about how to standardize data from government entities. It talks about, utility companies, telcos, electrical. So with that, like, thinking, you are already laying the foundation from the beginning, which will allow you to really move faster when it comes to putting the right infrastructure in place. So we're just thinking ahead when it comes to the bigger picture, which is open data and then open economy.
Absolutely. And if you look at Australia, they have already started to bring open energy into the mix after open banking, and they're talking about open telecom, open healthcare, and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
So coming to you, Jubran, especially in Saudi, if you look at the initiatives from SAMA and also the FSDP objectives that have come across around, so they have talked about a couple of things. One, they have talked about increasing the penetration of digital payments. Second, they have talked about growing the capital markets in the country. And third, they have talked about growing the savings rate among the consumers in Saudi. So how do you see the relevance of open finance, because especially in terms of savings, payments, and investments and wealth management in KSA?
Great question, and it works perfectly with Abe just discussed a minute ago. When we look at the sequence and the phases that we need, it's, for us as fintechs, I want it now. I need open finance now. And I would agree on that point of let's do open finance. I'm not really too excited about, especially on the information side. That can always catch up, and it's a nice feature to have. But we need to monetize. A lot of these are small companies that are coming up, and we need to have these services because they're more tangible and more sticky when it comes down to customers. Now, for the regulator, which one should they focus on? Because on the other side, where there's banks and there's the investment banks and brokerages and so on, that's where it gets messy. An example is KYC. So if we're going to do an eKYC, how is that going to be processed? Who's going to process it exactly? That's one question that comes up. Payments. I would love to have open payments set up. This way it would make it easier and smoother and cheaper for the consumer to use the open finance APIs. So sequencing is, doesn't sound good for us as entrepreneurs. Actually, we want it all right now. And that's kind of the sticky spot that SAMA and other regulators are at right now. Yet, as you mentioned, they do have this ambitious strategy they just rolled out. They're talking about supporting entrepreneurship. They're talking about supporting the fintech industry. And they're going to work on the regulations to make sure that it's more supportive of fintechs and what they're trying to do, which is very disruptive to the financial market, which in essence is a highly regulated market, specifically here in Saudi Arabia. So seeing this transition the next 2 years, and hopefully it's a quick one, at least for us, that's what we're going to keep our eye on. And we're trying always to figure out how we can get there to open finance, because that's what we're working on, because I can't agree more with going down to open finance. Going down to open economy, I think that's going to happen in Saudi Arabia. The government has already put up an infrastructure for integrating with different services. And I think within the next 3 to 4 years, there's going to be a ramp up of that open economy and having all these APIs available to develop new services. And we may even see more super apps in the market by 2025.
Perfect. Thanks, Jubran. So coming to you, Alina, given your experience of working in other markets, what kind of opportunity you see, not just for the fintechs, but also for banks where they can be excited about open banking and new revenue streams that it can open for them?
Well, excitement towards open banking comes only when you understand the power of consuming somebody else's APIs.
Yeah.
And not only that, having a framework where there is no need to go and build like contracts or legals in place to be able to collaborate. And this is the beauty of open banking. It just be a friend with everybody, consume everybody, do whatever you want, build whatever product you want. Just it's complicated for a company that does financial services like a bank. They're doing lending for all of their life, let's say, and now they instantly need to switch off to a product cycle mentality. Like, what is there? How we should? It's like changing to an IT company from a bank. It's a very hard in any geography. if to mention open data and the scope, let's go back to like very simple things. Imagine every offline process that is very painful for you, like onboarding your child to school. The thing that Australian people were thinking about was like, okay, I want to make this happen from my phone online, but for this I need data structures that are okay to share the data. That would be governmental data, that would be school data, that would be banking data, insurance data, you name it. But they already have a vision for that. And this is something to be decided on a regulatory level, because they are the ones that facilitate this friendship, let's say, between banks and fintechs, but it's also drove by the competition in the market. Like you would see in the half a year use cases that you would not even imagine now, that combine even now with only open banking, insurance, I don't know, payroll or whatever, health, education, housing, everything in one place. And that's because of the imagination of the entrepreneurs in the market. So it's a challenge to the banks. Are you entrepreneur enough to switch that mentality and to move on to a different approach? I don't think everybody's ready. So let's start from the basic. Like, let's understand what's open banking and why it's really needed.
Absolutely. So coming back to you, Abe, I think you touched upon the opportunity a little bit in terms of embedded finance and banking as a service, where banks have a larger play rather than just looking at open banking from a compliance angle. Help us understand what's the opportunity look like in the region, because we have already seen the likes of Amazon and Apple launching financial products in the US and the UK. But do you see Middle East is there yet, or we are kind of couple of years behind the curve and we'll get there in the next couple of years? How do you see the industry evolve?
Based on research that we had done recently with one of our partners, we've actually identified that the embedded finance market, specifically in the region, is about $1.8 billion, and that's like considered, and we're forecasting that, conservatively, it will grow in the next 5 years, a compound annual growth rate of 35%, bringing up to $8.2 billion. And if we're really optimistic, the high estimates would be a CAGR of 60% if we get more the likes of BSF. And, I don't want to, I know some clients who are working on this who haven't shared it publicly, so I won't be able to mention that, but there's at least half a dozen banks across Saudi, across the UAE, who have been working on this and are looking at very interesting use cases. So, again, the bigger estimate is that would grow up to $19 billion. So the opportunity is there. The question really becomes, how do you take advantage of that? And that boils down to, again, the journey that you want to create. For example, one of our clients who approached us, they said, listen, you know what, if I want to partner with local e-commerce platforms, so the likes of noon.com, and again, when Souk, before it became Amazon, but if I were to approach them and say, listen, I'm a local bank, we're in the same country, we're based out of the UAE, and I want you to embed this capability to allow a merchant during their onboarding process and without leaving the onboarding portal to be able to open a bank account, receive their IBAN, and get that whole experience embedded into the journey. And for them, it was really about finding that point in the journey where they remove a lot of friction, because typically, and all of us who have launched companies in the region, myself included, know that opening a bank account is a nightmare. And this is a simple thing. When I opened a bank account for my own company, when I first moved to the region, it took me 3 months. And now I'm imagining if I had this experience built into the portal of the free zone where I had incorporated my company, I would have been a much happier customer, much more loyal customer, etc. But another interesting consideration you have to bear in mind with this whole embedded finance is who owns the client experience afterwards. So it's great. It's a big market. It's juicy, and I will come back to your point about the revenue piece. But another consideration is who owns the relationship, who owns the experience. Is it, in the example I provided, is it the noon.com? Is it the free zone that incorporated me but allowed me to open the account? Or is it this bank, a financial institution that provided the APIs to perform KYC and sanction screening, to actually open the account and to provide me my IBAN and to send me my credentials so I can download the app and right away start banking on my app? Who owns the experience after your onboarding? And logically, now, and why, by the way, and this ties into the point about the revenue, why do banks do it? Is because that's one more client on their book of business. But now there has to be very, let's just say, stringent SLAs between the company that onboarded the customer on behalf of the bank, and the bank has to have certain expectations to make sure that they're collecting the right information and they're also compliant with all of this. Now, another thing to bear in mind is if this is done right, it can become a brand new revenue stream. And we've seen this, by the way. There have been very successful use cases, around the world. Comparing to the numbers I shared with you earlier when I said, the region is sitting this year around 1.8 billion. Compare that to a global market size of embedded finance, 56.7 billion. And again, that's anticipated to grow to, 570 billion by 2027. So what does that tell you? It tells you that there has been a lot of success stories in the market globally, and us in the Middle East, with the right mindset, the likes of BSF and the likes of even other licensed entities that have these capabilities, they could really start to create revenue streams for themselves, but add value to the market. I'll share one last example. When you look at companies that are consortiums, so they're not banks, but they're licensed. So, for example, you look at Benefit. Benefit is, consortium between all the banks in Bahrain, and they do things like credit bureau, your payments, your eKYC, etc. But what if they offer their eKYC service not just to banks, but to fintechs as well, and it's a clean API they can use? What if all of the payment APIs could also be accessed directly through Benefit because they're a licensed entity, and that is a form of embedded finance? Or to the point that Jubran made, it becomes like open payments. Look at Jopac in Jordan, again, consortium between the banks, etc. So there's different models that can be followed, but in general, this is a very interesting space for financial institutions. And in my humble opinion, I urge all of the banks that are about to embark on their open banking journey to think from the beginning and have conversations with your IT teams to say, guys, all I'm doing is just adding some extra endpoints, but rather than initiating a payment or providing data, I call an API that I already have that allows me to open a bank account, which is part of my digital banking stack. Does it make sense? Yes. So my advice to the market, talk about it now, because there is a great opportunity for you to create new revenue and add it to your balance sheet.
Absolutely. And we have started to see some of the banks in Europe and UK going through this strategy. For example, Starling is talking about Starling as a service, where they are partnering with non-banks and fintechs and monetizing the infrastructure that they have built over time. We also have examples from the US where Cross River Bank, which was a new bank, and they have monetized the infrastructure in a big way in the US. So I think there are success stories
a very funny fact that happened to me at Money 2020, for example. There were 3 or 4 banks that were selling services to fintechs. So it was
exactly
the other way around. This is where we're heading, so you understand.
Absolutely. Yeah, coming to you, Jubran. So one of the important aspects of financial inclusion is also talking about the new segment, the Gen Zs and the teens of the world, because they are coming up with very different behavior, very different affinities. And that's the segment that banks would struggle to onboard directly, right? Because they will rather work with a non-bank and a digital platform rather than go to a bank and open an account. Given your positioning in the market, how do you see open finance opening the opportunity for this consumer segment to become a part of financial services industry?
Great point. When you look at Gen Z and you look at millennials specifically, they're the new market coming in. They're driving a lot of the real estate purchases when we look at it globally, and even more specifically in different areas. And they're more demanding when it comes down to financial services, that instant gratification and that embedded services that they want. The metaverse comes into a point here where, when they have most of their services on there, having those APIs and those embedded services available in the metaverse is another opportunity. Whether it be on tokenization or on financial services is a whole different discussion, but yet they're on that area. And they want more embedded services, and that's where it's heading with millennials. So having a bank app is one thing, but being able to make a transaction on the spot via another application or another platform is the future for millennials. They also want to make sure that everything's on one place. It makes sense. They're able to make decisions quickly. If they have to, go all over, or the financial terms are, a bit confusing, that's not something that they want. So open finance, open banking, and even the open economy is what millennials want. And the sooner that entities head off to that trajectory, the more that they'll be able to succeed and grow in the future. And that's where they need to be thinking about it. And just going back onto banks, we have a great example here in Saudi Arabia with the Arab National Bank. They were the only bank that had their doors open to fintechs. Any fintech that came by and said, I need an API, I need the service, they said, come in, we'll give you what you want. Up until today, all fintechs are connected with AMP. There's a lot of work going on with banks as well, but they're the first ones to just open up their bank and do banking as a service. And I do hope banks do take banking as a service seriously now in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, because that's where it's heading. Back to your question about millennials. If you don't open up that platform, you are excluding yourself from that market. It's only a matter of time when all these services will be available, rather by certain banks that do make that challenging step, or by others from other regions. So banking as a service should be a key pillar, if not the strategy, for a lot of the banks in the region. And I think that's what they're struggling with, is how can we be a utility and not be in the forefront? And that's what a lot of banks need to figure out here in the region, and specifically in Saudi Arabia.
Perfect. So coming to you, Alina, I think we discussed a little bit of opportunity around SME finance. Abe alluded to earlier. And given the way SME banking has been underserved for so many years, for so many reasons, how do you see open banking and open finance kind of enabling not just the fintechs and non-banks, but also banks to cost effectively serve that segment?
So let's look at the SME life, like what's crucial for them. Cash flow, right? It's an element that decides upon the fate of an SME, especially in the time of like ours. And if we divide it like in the two parts, on the fintech side, there are a lot of solutions that already use open banking. Like, for example, one of our clients, Odo, it's a big CRM and ERP. They use open banking data to enable businesses to reconcile invoices and payments and have a quick status on their finances so they can take fast decisions. And from the bank side, well, the most obvious use case would be like opening a bank account and easy access to lending, like loans for SMEs. And that's also a process that can be automated using open banking. Using open banking can make the process of giving a loan fully online. You can check all their accounts in all the banks, give a quick answer on the loan if you're okay or not. And sometimes they need their loan air to survive. And it goes the same for loan reimbursement, because you can use payment initiation to finish that process and allow the SMEs to pay at a very low cost the interest rates for you. And if you think of all the pains in a relationship to money for SMEs, I think this is the place of any use case that involves open banking, and it can solve them.
Perfect.
I'd like to add a couple of points to what Alina shared, because again, before joining FinTech Galaxy and in my career, I'm a banker, by the way, for people's information. I'm a banker who turned technologist almost. So I'm a bit of a guy who's in the middle here. But when I had my own company in Canada for the longest time before I moved to the Middle East, and even right now, I go through the pain of having to reconcile all of my transactions to do all my taxes. And I kid you not, this may sound funny. I've been putting it off, and I'm not normally not a procrastinator for the last 3 months because I have to download bank statements from Amex, from Bank of Montreal, from Royal Bank, and credit cards and checking account, and then I got to send it to my accountant who is based in India for him to take it out of the statements and put it into my accounting solution. So just like when you think about, like Alina said, the life of a SME, it really revolves around your finances. And I like some of the examples that Alina kindly shared, but I also think when you start looking at direct integration with accounting solutions, when you start looking at payments, the cheaper payments that you could receive from direct account-to-account payment rather than having to accept a credit card payment, which costs you up to 5%. Which as a SME, it would make a huge difference. And then, one of the things that I also wanted to share, and this is one of our specialties at FinTech Galaxy, which is open innovation, as you kindly said in the introduction, Sanjeev. Right now, if you guys go on FinHub 973, which is the digital lab that we stood up for Central Bank of Bahrain, the example that Alina suggested is actually published there as a problem statement. And Bahrain Islamic Bank, BISB, is going through exactly that. They said, we want to use open banking to do STP, straight-through processing of loans. When you think about it, everything to do from eliminating the need to request a stack of audited, 3-year audited financial statements, because you can just simply pull the data directly out of all the banks that you interact with through online banking, through open banking rather. The ability to use, payment initiation to disperse the funds, as Alina kindly suggested, and then everything in between, which is leveraging the data to provide insights and potentially even do cross-sell. So I think, in my humble opinion, I'll just conclude by saying this. One of the biggest gaps in financial services, and that has been going on for the last decade, is there was a big focus on retail, massive focus on corporate, and SME fell through the crack. Now we have an opportunity with this new technology, with this new framework, with open finance to really turn this around. And for smart governments that are saying, God bless his soul, the late, Sheikh Nahyan, he said, the day I ran out of the last barrel of oil is the day I celebrate. And why did he say that? Because in the vision of the UAE, as an example, it already stated that we have to optimize our small business segment because that is the future. Enough said.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the GDP contribution of SMEs in almost all the Middle East countries, it is somewhere between 20% to 40%. And employment contribution is even higher, 40% to 60%. So I think it's an important sector, not just for the governments and regulators to look after, but also for the banks, because they are the bedrock of evolution of the economy in the region, to really focus on the segment and go after the opportunity.
Exactly.
Perfect. I think we are coming towards the end of our session, and I just wanted to touch upon the final thing, which is the challenges for open banking in the region. And that becomes a little tricky, but I would love to hear your views on what are some of the most important obstacles you see towards the progression of embracing open finance in the Middle East. Why don't we start with you, Alina?
Thank you. Actually, this is something that I mentioned in the beginning. The biggest challenge is not everyone being on board. You want the fintechs are ready to consume. The banks, maybe some of the banks are also into this to consume and build products and so on. But if not everybody is on board, if you don't open the APIs in a good way in terms of if they are compliant. You have all this little feature like redirection back to the giving a status, whatever. So it's a lot of details that make this journey seamless. And if not everybody understand what's the value for this, no one will strive going there. Like there is a difference between your culture in the culture in Europe. Failure is not accepted in your region. This is something that I understood. So my call to action to you is to be consistent with your culture and do it right from the first time. Like go and understand what's the benefit for your business. And if you understood, go to the other banks and explain to them, this is the benefit from open banking. Let's do this together. And if you embark on this journey, you'll have a lot to win. And my wish for you is to win. So thank you.
Perfect. Abe, over to you on the challenge.
Honestly, I could really talk about this till tomorrow morning, but just to keep it brief, like some of the major challenges with the open banking model is from the beginning, and as I shared earlier, the banks are not taking the time to understand how do I properly maximize value for me and for the market for my clients. There is no clear revenue model for the banks. Oftentimes, they just look at this as a checkbox exercise. There aren't enough quality TPPs in some markets. Markets like Saudi, they've got very good quality. Markets like Bahrain, they've got good, but they're quite a few. And then you've got markets where they've got none, and then yet they're still trying to push open banking. We're also finding that there isn't any unified solutions for merchants, for business clients. So you'll find that there isn't any consistency in the service that some of these players will receive. And there isn't proper awareness when it comes to adoption. So whether it's adoption by the end users, the consumers, or adoption by merchants and businesses, or adoption even by banks, they don't fully understand what this is all about and what is the potential that it will bring to the market. And as a result, they are quite resistant. And I'll just share one small anecdote. I was sitting with a CEO of a fully digital bank, and I'm asking him about your plans for connecting and becoming open banking enabled because it's coming to the region. And this country, they hadn't pushed out the regulation. And to my surprise, his response was, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I'm not exposing my data. I don't want to get hacked. And that made me realize how much that there is a lack of awareness in the market. So to me, one of the big challenges as well is not taking the time to educate the market on what it really is and why is it secure and why is it better than what already happens in the market with screen scraping and some of the other messy things. So I'll leave it at that. I think Alina said it very well, and I've heard it directly from regulators. We cannot fail because the moment we fail in that first step, everything is just going to fold. So do it right from the beginning, and that will really help pave the path forward.
Perfect. Last pointers from you, Jubran, on the key challenges for open banking in Saudi.
Like I said in the beginning, this is an exciting time. A lot of innovation, a lot of there are a lot of young entrepreneurs.
I think Jubran is facing some challenges of his own. All right. I think, yeah, Jubran, go ahead.
No, that was it. In essence, it's just an exciting time. We'll leave it at that.
Perfect. All right. Thanks a lot, gentlemen and ladies, for sharing your views on the open banking, open finance journey and relevance for the Middle East region. Thanks a lot for joining the session, and handing it over to Amir for taking the session forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.